Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a world that's, well, fascinated and baffled people for centuries. Alchemy. When you hear that word, maybe you picture, cloaked figures, bubbling beakers, and that endless search for gold.
Hmm. That's the common image, definitely.
Well, get ready, because the material we're exploring for this deep dive, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Alchemy by Dennis William Hauck, it reveals that those stereotypes, they barely scratch the surface.
That's right.
Alchemy, at its heart, according to the source, is defined as the art of transformation, the drive to take something imperfect and make it better, perfect it, evolve it.
That's the core takeaway right from the beginning, yeah. And as the book lays out, this isn't limited to just changing metals or, chemicals. This principle of transformation applies across the board to our physical bodies, our minds, our spiritual selves,
Right.
and even to seemingly unrelated fields like medicine, psychology, sociology, and yes, even software development. It's incredibly broad.
It really is. So, for this deep dive, our mission is to understand alchemy through the lens of this book. We're going to trace its history, grasp its fundamental concepts, peek into the alchemist's lab and operations, see how it applies to nature, and perhaps most importantly, explore how this ancient art is about profound transformation within ourselves, with some surprising connections to the modern world.
Sounds like a plan.
Think of us as your guides navigating this fascinating source material together.
Okay, so diving into the ancient roots. The origins are incredibly deep. They're connected to ancient Egypt. Legends attribute foundational writings to Thoth, dating back over, 10,000 years. They were said to be preserved in two great pillars, later linked to Hermes Trismegistus, and supposedly rediscovered after the Great Flood.
Wow, 10,000 years, that's
Yeah,
ancient.
it is. And this rediscovery, the story goes, fueled the creation of Alexandria. It was built specifically as a center for studying and translating these sacred texts. Alexandria became this global hub for alchemy. And it's quite poignant that the great library there, housing so many of these precious manuscripts, including potentially Thoth's originals, well, it suffered repeated burnings.
Yeah, that's tragic. An incalculable loss of knowledge.
Absolutely.
Speaking of those ancient writings, the book talks about one artifact said to be found within Thoth's pillars, the Emerald Tablet. I mean, this thing sounds almost mythical. What is it, according to this account?
Well, it's presented as a really succinct summary of the entire alchemical philosophy, sort of an outline of the whole universe, condensed. What's fascinating is that phrases from it seem to resonate with even older Egyptian texts, like the Papyrus of On or chapters from the Book of the Dead. And it's described not as something engraved, but as a cast stone, like melted, hardened glass, almost artificial looking.
A cast stone. Interesting.
Yeah. And this tablet's wisdom traveled. Alexander the Great is said to have taken it to Memphis and then Hermopolis after his conquest. And while Alexandria was crucial, the source points out that we see the first known alchemy books appearing almost simultaneously in Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and China over 2 millennia ago.
Right, not just Egypt then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all of them were referencing traditions that were already ancient then. By around 300 CE, these core alchemical principles were pretty widely recognized across the known world.
And it's important to remember, as the book highlights, that women played a significant role in early alchemy too. It specifically mentions Maria Prophetessa, also known as Mary the Jewess, who lived in Alexandria around 200 BCE. She wasn't just a theorist, she was apparently a brilliant inventor.
Absolutely, a key figure.
Yeah.
She's credited with inventing essential lab equipment that, we still use variations of today, like the bain-marie, which is basically just a double boiler water bath for gentle heating.
Ah, the bain-marie. I didn't know that came from alchemy.
Yep. And the keratosis apparatus, which was used to expose metals to vapors. Beyond equipment, she's linked to the discovery of hydrochloric acid and creating something called Mary's Black, a fascinating fused alloy of sulfur and a lead-copper mixture.
Wow, she sounds like a serious chemist.
She was. And Maria Prophetessa also left us some really profound sayings that capture the essence of the alchemical process. She emphasized the unification of opposing forces. Invert nature, and you will find that which you seek. Join the male and the female, and you will find what is sought.
The union of opposites again.
Exactly. And her mystical description of transformation. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and by means of the third and fourth, it achieves unity. Lest the two are but one. It's all about that fusion.
Fascinating. So after the Alexandrian period, where did alchemy go?
Well, the Arabian alchemists became crucial custodians of this knowledge. They meticulously copied and translated the Alexandrian texts, preserving them during periods when they might otherwise have been lost. And eventually they reintroduced them to Europe, particularly through their presence in Spain.
Okay, so they were the bridge, in a way.
Very much so. And the most celebrated figure from this era is probably Jabir ibn Hayyan, who lived from 721 to 815. He's often called the greatest Arabian alchemist.
Oh.
He was incredibly prolific, a true experimentalist. The book lists his achievements: refining metals, preparing steel, working with dyes, varnishes, gold ink, skilled in glassmaking, producing substances like acetic acid, lead carbonate, arsenic, antimony. The list goes on.
And there's that great detail about his writings. Apparently, they were so intentionally coded and complex, almost like a secret language, that outsiders found them basically meaningless. That's supposedly the origin of the word gibberish.
Ah, yes, that's the story. A perfect description for his coded work. Jabir's foundational theory for metals was based on the idea that they formed deep underground from dry exhalations, which he called sulfur, and wet exhalations, which he called mercury.
Sulfur and mercury.
Okay. He saw gold as the ideal, perfectly balanced combination of these two. And his lifelong quest was for the philosopher's stone, which he believed could instantly perfect any base metal into gold by, correcting this sulfur-mercury balance.
Okay, so that brings us from the history to the core ideas. The book positions alchemy as deeply connected to something called the perennial philosophy. What does that mean in this context?
Right. It's the underlying idea that the material world, the world we see and touch, isn't the only reality. Or maybe not the most fundamental reality. There's believed to be a hidden, higher reality that sort of determines existence. Our physical world is seen as a kind of shadow or reflection of this deeper reality.
A hidden dimension.
Exactly. And this higher truth isn't accessible through just our five senses, but through, let's say, higher faculties of mind and spirit. Intuition, insight, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Now, what makes alchemy distinct within this broad philosophy is its insistence on applying this wisdom practically, trying to actually manipulate matter and the self based on this understanding of hidden realities.
So it's not just thinking about it, it's doing something.
Precisely. And that blend of practical work in the lab and, well, esoteric spiritual belief is exactly why alchemists were often viewed with suspicion. They faced severe persecution, even being burnt at the stake sometimes.
Right, because it challenged established views. So if there's this underlying reality, what's the fundamental stuff that everything is made of, according to alchemical thought? This brings us to the concept of the first matter. How is that described in the source?
The first matter, or prima materia, it's presented as this primordial, unorganized state, something existing like between pure energy and formed matter, proto-matter, you could say. It's seen as the same potential for all substances before it gets organized or defined, and it's consciousness, or divine light, that's thought to organize it. It's the cornerstone the builders forgot.
The cornerstone the builders forgot. I like that.
Yeah, it's often symbolized by things that are rejected or overlooked, even metaphorically our own unexamined desires, the stuff we push into the shadow.
So the messy stuff holds the potential.
Kind of, yeah. The Eastern Tai Chi, or yin-yang symbol, is actually a good visual for these spinning forces of darkness and light contained within the first matter. It contains the potential for all the components of creation, including the four elements and that mysterious quintessence we'll get to.
Okay.
Albertus Magnus, a later figure, came to a similar conclusion. He stated that metals are fundamentally alike in their essence, differing only in their outer form. That points back to this idea of a common origin.
I really like the analogy used in the book describing the first matter as a poisonous dragon. It sounds intimidating, even dangerous.
It does. It implies it can burn things away if not handled with care, with reverence. But it's also described as the source of tremendous transformative energy, the egg of nature.
So powerful, but needs respect.
Exactly. Approach it slowly, reverently. That dragon energy, that potential, is contained within the first matter in every single substance, sometimes called its inner star. It's also linked to the anima mundi, the soul of the world, this idea that there's a living soul present in all things.
The world soul.
Right, so the spiritual work in alchemy is seen as purifying this inner first matter within the alchemists themselves. As they perfect the substance in the flask, they're perfecting their own soul. The two are linked.
Okay, so from this first matter, this potential, emerge the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. How did alchemists understand these?
They followed Aristotle mainly, seeing these elements defined by primary qualities: wetness, which relates to fluidity and adaptability, and dryness, relating to rigidity and structure. You combine these with hot and cold. So hot and dry gives you fire. Hot and wet is air. Cold and wet is water. And cold and dry is earth. It's a system.
And the book connects these elements to so many other systems, doesn't it? It links them to astrology, seeing them as representing the basic nature or temperament of the signs. Earth signs for practicality, water for feelings, air for thoughts, fire for pure energy.
Exactly. And it even goes back to Hippocrates' theory of the four humors in medicine. Melancholic corresponds to earth, sanguine to air, choleric to fire, and phlegmatic to water. It shows how these ideas permeated different fields.
It's like a fundamental code.
In a way, yes. Alchemists viewed the relationships between these elements as really dynamic, almost like a rotating machine driven by the tension between opposites, the strife between opposites, as Heraclitus might say. This leads to a natural rotation of the elements cycle. Water's adaptation leads to air's expansion, which fuels fire's production or action, which then leads to Earth's retraction or grounding.
And you see this pattern everywhere.
Everywhere. In the seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, in the stages of human life, childhood, youth, adulthood, old age, even in the rise and fall of nations or ideas.
Wow.
And fire, as the most potent agents of change, was particularly revered. Alchemists often called themselves philosophers of fire because it was so crucial for transformation.
Okay, so the four elements, but there's a fifth, the quintessence.
Yes, the quintessence, the fifth element, or ether. It's described as this luminous, invisible light. It's present in both the material and spiritual realms. It's thought to be what stars are made of, but also, crucially, it exists as a hidden star within everything. A spark of the divine, you might say.
A hidden star within everything.
Right. And this concept echoes across traditions. Think of Chinese Qi, Tantric Kundalini, Hindu Prana. Similar ideas of a vital life force or subtle energy. There's also the idea of the central fire, the fire of creation itself, the embedded word of God within matter. The quintessence is linked to this creative spark.
So the first matter gives us the elements, and the book says it also gives us the three essentials, often symbolized by a three-headed serpent. Everything can apparently be reduced to these three principles: sulfur, mercury, and salt. Alchemists often capitalize them, right? Or called them philosophical or sophic. Sulfur, mercury, and salt.
Exactly, to distinguish them from the common substances. And remember Jabir's early metallic theory, that was based on just sulfur and mercury.
Right, he hadn't added salt yet.
No, it was Paracelsus, much later, who really solidified this trio, adding salt and clarifying their roles in a way that applied beyond just metals to, well, everything, including ourselves. Think of them like this, based on the book's descriptions. Sulfur is the soul, the passion, the will, the drive, potential energy. It's fixed, oily, combustible.
Okay, soul and passion.
Mercury is the spirit thoughts, imagination, the life force itself, active intelligence. It's volatile, fluid, represents communication between higher and lower realms.
Spirit and mind.
And salt is the body, the form, the structure, the resultant force, identity. It's the unconscious force, the vessel that contains the interaction of sulfur and mercury. It's the stabilizing principle, the child born from their marriage.
Body and form, the result.
Exactly, applied to us personally. Sulfur is our inner drive and passion. Mercury is our mental activity, our imagination. And salt represents the final, perfected form, the crystallized consciousness that emerges from their balanced union. That's the philosopher's stone within, essentially.
Ah, so the stone is the balanced combination of these three within us.
That's one way to see the internal work, yes. The Golden Dawn tradition, mentioned in the source, saw the imagination of Mercury combined with the will of sulfur as producing magical effects. And you see parallels in other systems too, like the Taoist three treasures, Shen, spirit like Mercury, Qi, energy will like sulfur, and Qing, essence body like salt. They align beautifully.
Okay, that's a lot of building blocks. With those understood, let's talk about the ultimate prize, the legendary goal, the Philosopher's Stone. The book says this quest originated way back in Alexandria?
It really did. It became the central focus, the holy grail of practical alchemy. And its promised powers were truly remarkable. It wasn't just about the ability to transmute base metals like lead into perfect gold. That was significant, sure, but equally vital, perhaps more so, was the promise of achieving spiritual perfection, even eternal life.
Eternal life. Wow.
Well, the transformation of corruptible metal into incorruptible gold was seen as a direct parallel for the transformation of a mortal, imperfect human being into something immortal and perfected, from corruptible to incorruptible on all levels.
That makes sense. And the book brings in this fascinating figure connected to the stone, Dr. John Dee. This guy sounds like something out of a novel, a Renaissance man through and through. Mathematician, mapmaker, cryptographer, philosopher, occultist, astrologer, even an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. had a huge library and laboratory.
He was extraordinary, and he created this incredibly powerful symbol, the hieroglyphic monad, specifically as a cipher, a visual representation of the Philosopher's Stone.
The monad. Okay, what does it symbolize according to the book?
It's incredibly dense with meaning. The book describes its symbolism like this. You start with the outermost circle, representing the hermetic egg or the first matter. Within that, you see the astrological symbol for the sun, which also represents gold, that circle with a point in the center. And it's united with the lunar crescent, symbolizing the moon and silver. This represents the perfect union of opposites, sun and moon, male and female.
Okay, the union again.
Exactly. Surrounding this core union are symbols representing the four elements, and then superimposed are the three essentials. Sulfur is symbolized by the sun pillar on one side, salt by the moon pillar on the other, and Mercury is the central line uniting them all.
Wow, it packs everything in.
It really does. And the belief, according to the source, was that simply contemplating or drawing this symbol carefully could evoke the very spirit and intelligence of the stone. It wasn't just a diagram. It was considered magically potent.
Okay, let's step out of the philosophy and symbolism for a bit and into the practical world. What was it actually like inside an alchemist's workshop? The book pushes back against that stereotype of the mad, messy alchemist, right? It describes organized, dedicated spaces in medieval and Renaissance times.
Yes, absolutely. They were serious practitioners by the standards of their day, often quite meticulous. Let's take a look inside based on the book's descriptions. The absolute heart of the lab, the central piece of equipment, was the athanor. This was the furnace. It was usually a tall brick oven, often called the philosophical furnace.
The philosophical furnace?
Right. It was designed for long, slow, gentle, controlled heating processes like digestion or incubation. It had to maintain heat steadily, sometimes for days, weeks, or even months. Very different from a blacksmith's forge.
Gentle, controlled heat. Got it.
And the glassware was quite sophisticated for the time. There was the versatile retort, which is basically a simple boiling vessel with a long neck pointing downwards or sideways. For distillation, they used a setup. The cucurbit, which was the boiling flask, sitting on the heat source. On top of that went the alembic, the still head, which collected the vapor and directed it through a tube to a receiver flask where it condensed back into liquid.
Okay, the classic distillation setup.
Pretty much. There was also the pelican, which was a specific type of medieval circulatory distillation apparatus where the condensed liquid automatically flowed back into the boiling vessel.
Ah, like a feedback loop.
Sort of, yeah. They also used various flasks like matrices or bolt heads, the aludal or hermetic vase, which was a series of stacked vessels used for sublimation, plus various beakers, cylinders. And their shapes often had symbolic names reflecting the processes: the philosopher's egg, the womb, the skull cup. For high-temperature work, melting metals or assaying, they used crucibles made of clay or graphite, and cupels, which were porous cups used to separate noble metals like gold and silver from base metals like lead.
So, a lot of specialized equipment. What about the chemicals they used? The book highlights certain arcana or powerful secrets on the shelf.
Yes, the arcana. Vitriol was crucial, especially green vitriol, which is iron sulfate. From this, they could distill sulfuric acid, a very strong acid they sometimes called the green lion, because it was powerful enough to dissolve most metals, seen as the key to unlocking their essences.
The green lion. Okay.
Then there was natron, a naturally occurring mixture, primarily sodium carbonate. This was used to make nitric acid, which they called aqua fortis, strong water, because it could dissolve silver, though not gold. Mixing nitric and hydrochloric acid made aqua regia, royal water, which could dissolve gold.
Aqua hortis. Aqua regia. Strong stuff.
Definitely. There was also liquor hepatis, a liver-colored sulfide mixture, often seen as a sacred balm, the balsam of the soul, used in purification, and pulvis solaris, the powder of the sun. This was usually a red or black powder made by combining purified sulfur for something like mercuric oxide or antimony sulfide. It was believed to have immense healing power, representing a kind of mystical third state, a new incarnation where the combined essence was greater than the sum of its parts.
Healing power. Interesting.
But it's absolutely critical to add the tread carefully note the book includes here. Alchemical labs were inherently dangerous places. Many of the substances they worked with, antimony, lead, arsenic, and particularly mercury and its compounds, are highly toxic. The book strongly advises against anyone trying to handle these chemicals without proper modern knowledge and safety precautions.
Good point. Very important safety warning. Besides chemicals and glassware, what else was in the lab? Tools.
Sure, basic tools. Tongs for handling hot crucibles, scoops and spatulas, scales for precise measurement, which was important, presses for herbs if they were doing spagyric work, bellows for controlling the fire in the furnace. The serpent condenser is also mentioned, a long coiled tube, often cooled by water, used for efficient condensation in distillation. It allowed for gentle purification and isolation of volatile essences.
Okay. But perhaps the most revealing part of the lab setup, according to the source, wasn't the equipment, but something else entirely.
You mean the oratorium?
Exactly. The private space for meditation and prayer, often with an altar or tabernacle right there next to the lab equipment.
Yes, that's crucial for understanding the alchemist's mindset. Their famous motto, ora et labora. Pray and work wasn't just a saying, it was fundamental. They believed that purifying and focusing their own mind through contemplation, prayer, and meditation was absolutely necessary for the material work in the lab to succeed. They needed to connect their own consciousness with the mind of nature or the spirit within the substance they were working on.
That's such a powerful idea. The alchemist wasn't just an objective observer manipulating matter, they were part of the experiment themselves. The book emphasizes this conscious connection, saying the alchemist sympathized with the substance, suffering and changing alongside it. Success in the lab was also seen as a sign of spiritual progress within the alchemist.
Absolutely. The inner state and the outer work were seen as reflections of each other, which brings us perfectly to the actual steps of transformation, the operations themselves. The book breaks these down into stages, often grouped into three main phases, usually color-coded. The black phase, nigredo, the red phase, albedo, and the red phase, rubedo.
Okay, let's start with the black phase, nigredo. This sounds intense. The book describes it as the longest and most difficult stage. Torturous, even. It's about reducing the substance down to its raw, bare essence, burning away all the dross and impurities, getting rid of the old form.
That's it, exactly. Key operations in this phase include calcination. This is heating a solid substance strongly in an open flame or crucible, basically to reduce it to bone by burning. Think of how burning wood leaves ash. Chemically, it often results in oxides, like calcium oxide from limestone. There's also a philosophical calcination mentioned, which refers more broadly to reducing living things by heat, like cremation or drying plants thoroughly. This was seen as a removal of the volatile life force, leaving behind the fixed, sacred ashes of what was once living.
Okay, burning down to the essence. What else happens in nigredo?
Dissolution is another vital operation here. This involves dissolving the calcined ashes, or the original substance, in a liquid, usually water or an acid. This process breaks down the rigid structures that were formed during calcination or that existed previously. It allows the hidden potential within the substance to emerge, but often in a chaotic, undifferentiated state, hence the blackness.
So breaking down structure, how does this relate psychologically?
Psychologically, nigredo corresponds to that dark night of the soul, periods of depression, despair, confusion, melancholia. It's the breakdown of the old ego structure, the old ways of being. But importantly, alchemy sees this not as an endpoint to be avoided, but as a necessary, natural process of purification. It's about bringing the trash heap of the subconscious, the Jungian shadow self, all the rejected, feared, or denied parts of ourselves to the light of consciousness.
Like confronting your own darkness.
Exactly. As one might do in deep therapy or personal work. The goal is to eventually integrate this dark side, not eliminate it. The book does caution about the danger of projection in these early stages, blaming others for the darkness you haven't yet owned in yourself.
Okay, that's a heavy phase. What follows the darkness? The white phase, albedo?
Right. After the breakdown and confrontation of nigredo comes albedo. This is where the blackness starts to yield to light. It's often described as a washing or purification. Matter seems to die and be reborn in a purer form.
A rebirth. Psychologically, this feels like a new self emerging, maybe, after old habits or beliefs have been shed or dissolved.
That's a good way to put it. The feeling of clarity after confusion, hope after despair. The operations associated with albedo are primarily separation and conjunction. Separation involves carefully disuniting or dividing the components that were dissolved in the previous stage, using filtration, decantation, or other methods to retrieve the basic constituents in a purified state.
Okay, sorting things up.
Psychologically, this maps onto gaining objectivity about yourself. Clearly seeing your own strengths and weaknesses, your virtues and faults, without the confusion of the nigredo. It's about discerning what's genuinely valuable in yourself, the essence, and discarding what's useless or detrimental, the dross, allowing your true self to shine through.
And then conjunction. That sounds like bringing things back together.
It is, but crucially, it's the union of purified opposing parts. The key is that this union must create a new compound, something different from simply mixing the original parts back together. It's the child of the conjunction.
A new creation.
Exactly. It was often depicted in alchemical imagery as a mystical sexual union, a mating of the purified essences, sometimes called the king and queen.
Ah, the alchemical wedding.
That's the one. Psychologically, it represents the union of the conscious and unconscious, the masculine and feminine principles within oneself, like Jung's animus and anima. It's an initial reconciliation, creating what alchemists sometimes call the fetus or the lesser stone, a state of inner balance and wholeness, a major step towards the greater enlightenment represented by the philosopher's stone.
Okay.
The book mentions symbolic drawings here, showing the alchemist bringing together two birds, representing the volatile soul and spirit, with a plant growing between them, signifying that nature itself is taking over the process of growth and integration at this stage.
From black to white.
And then we arrive at the red phase, rubedo. What happens here? This is described as the infusion of life, the reddening. It's often symbolized as the final perfected love and union of the white queen, the purified receptive principle from albedo, and the red king, the purified active principle, the marriage of the sun and the moon. Yes, rubedo is the combination, the perfection. Operations associated with this phase include fermentation. This is seen as a living process, a miracle of nature, often requiring the introduction of a ferment, something akin to yeast or bacteria in biological fermentation, which imparts life and specific qualities to the purified matter from albedo. It's related to cellular respiration, a living process.
Like bringing it truly alive.
Precisely. The primary symbol of successful fermentation in the subsequent stages is often the rebus, the divine hermaphrodite, two-headed, often winged, representing the perfect integration of opposites. The philosophical child is born. This stage requires carefully controlled, gentle heat, often compared to birds sitting on eggs, allowing the transformation to occur naturally.
Gentle heat again. And
then, crucially, comes distillation. We mentioned the apparatus before. This is about further purification by repeatedly vaporizing and condensing the substance. It separates the subtle spirit mercury from the gross body salt, and then reunites them in an even purer form.
more purification.
Yes, and multiplication of virtue. Techniques like cohobation, which is distilling the liquid off and then pouring it back into the solid residue to extract more, were common. And sublimation, where a solid is heated until it turns directly into a vapor, then cools back into a purified solid powder, often crystalline. This was seen as creating a superior, spiritualized form of the substance.
Ah, solid to vapor and back.
Right. The Emerald Tablet famously describes this circulation. It rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of both the above and the below. That's often interpreted as describing distillation and sublimation cycles.
That makes sense.
Distillation was considered perhaps the most important practical operation by many alchemists, believed to refine and multiply the power or virtue of the substance exponentially. The book notes astrological ciphers were sometimes used, like Virgo for distillation, Libra for sublimation.
And the final step.
The final step is coagulation. This is the ultimate fixation, the crystallization of the perfected substance into the stable, incorruptible form of the philosopher's stone. The symbols here are powerful: shining, incorruptible gold, perfectly balanced scales representing equilibrium, the egg-shaped stone itself, the holy grail containing the elixir of life, the perfected androgynous youth, and perhaps most famously, the phoenix rising renewed from its ashes, or the ortis, sunrise, signifying rebirth into perfection.
The phoenix. A perfect symbol for transformation.
Indeed, this is the final embodiment. Interestingly, the book notes that alchemists believe this final coagulation often happened naturally, almost spontaneously, once the material reached a sufficient level of purity and perfection through the preceding stages, especially distillation. The work becomes effortless at the end.
It's a remarkable process, and it's amazing how these principles extend beyond the lab. The book talks about alchemy in the natural world, particularly involving plants and metals.
Absolutely. This brings us into the realm of spagyrics, which is essentially plant alchemy. The word itself, coined by Paracelsus, combines Greek words meaning to separate and to combine. The basic process involved taking a plant, drying and grinding it, then using alchemical methods like distillation and calcination to separate its core essences, typically identified as its sulfur, its essential oils representing its soul and unique properties, its mercury, its alcohol or spirit obtained by fermentation and distillation, and its salt, its purified mineral ash obtained by calcining the plant residue representing its body.
Separate the sulfur, mercury, and salt of the plant.
Right, and then, crucially, you recombine these purified essences. The goal isn't just to extract something, but to create a final product, a tincture, an elixir that is more potent, more balanced, and holds the purified vital essence of the plant. Paracelsus described it as aiming to separate the false from the true. This work was often timed according to planetary alignments believed to govern the plant.
Planetary alignments. That leads into the doctrine of signatures, doesn't it?
It does. Spagyrics relies heavily on the doctrine of signatures, this ancient idea that there's an archetypal correspondence, a sympathetic link between a plant, a planet, its physical appearance or signature, and its healing properties or effects on the human body and mind. So, for example, as the book lays out, Saturn, associated with the metal lead in the element Earth, corresponds to qualities of structure, limitation, contraction, melancholy. Jupiter, linked to tin and air, suggests expansion, growth, order, wisdom. Mars, with iron and fire, relates to energy, action, drive, inflammation. Venus, with copper and water, points to love, harmony, generation, fluidity. Mercury, with quicksilver and air, signifies communication, adaptability, the mind. The moon, with silver and water, relates to cycles, fertility, the subconscious. And the sun, with gold and fire, represents vitality, consciousness, the heart, perfection.
So the plant carries the signature of its ruling planet.
That's the idea. And the star within the plant, mentioned in the source, is its connection to these archetypal celestial forces, its divine essence, which the spagyricist aims to reveal and potentize.
And you mentioned Paracelsus coined the term spagyrics. He's credited as the inventor, right? He seems really important.
Hugely important. He brought about a major shift in alchemy's focus in the Renaissance. He steered it away from primarily trying to make physical gold and towards using alchemical principles and methods with natural substances, plants, and minerals to create medicines. This new focus, which he called iatrochemistry or chemical medicine, was revolutionary. It emphasized extracting the active principle or arcanum of a substance for healing. This focus on targeted chemical cures earned him the title Father of Modern Medicine, even though his methods were rooted in alchemy.
That's a huge legacy, Father of Modern Medicine.
It really is. And his work connects directly to the understanding of the 7 classical planetary metals we just listed. Each metal is believed to carry the signature, the essential quality of its associated planet.
Saturn lead, Jupiter tin, Mars iron, Venus copper, Mercury quicksilver, Moon silver, Sun gold.
Exactly. The book even mentions some fascinating, though perhaps unconventional experiments by someone named Lily Kalisko in the early 20th century. She claimed to show an uncanny correlation between planetary movements, like conjunctions and oppositions, and changes in how solutions to the corresponding metal salts crystallized on filter paper, suggesting a real, if subtle, link.
Wow, that's intriguing. The book goes into some detail about specific metals, their signatures, properties, and even their dangers. Lead, ruled by Saturn.
Lead, Saturn.
Yeah.
Described as the sleeping giant, representing darkness, structure, limitation, melancholy, father time, sluggishness, but also the foundation. We know now, of course, that lead is highly poisonous. The book mentions Saturnism, lead poisoning, and even studies suggesting a historical link between lead exposure and increased anger or violence.
Right, the dangers are real.
Very real. Yet alchemists noted it was often found naturally with gold and silver, suggesting a hidden relationship. And they observed that finely powdered lead can spontaneously ignite in air, showing it holds the potential for fire, its own transformation, despite its heavy nature.
Okay. What about iron, linked to Mars?
Iron Mars.
Yes.
All about energy, raw power, action, drive. It serves humanity's will, for good or ill, in tools, industry, and weaponry. The book notes the dangers associated with the mythological Iron Age conflict, harshness. Iron has a strong passion or affinity for combining with other metals, creating alloys like steel. But the source warns of its spiritual dangers, uncontrolled aggression, impulsiveness, and the need to balance this fiery Martian energy with Venusian qualities like love and harmony.
Balance is key. And quicksilver, mercury.
Quicksilver, mercury, the most paradoxical metal. Liquid at room temperature, volatile, elusive. It's strongly associated with the spirit, the mind, communication, adaptability. Highly toxic, yet central to alchemy in many traditions. Indian alchemy, Rasayana, literally means the knowledge of mercury or path of quicksilver. They developed incredibly complex purification processes for mercury, believing it held the key to rejuvenation and longevity, as seen in remedies like Maharajwaj oil. But again, the source stresses its inherent toxicity and the absolute necessity of extreme purification and avoiding overuse.
Purification seems vital for mercury. Then silver, the moon's metal.
Silver, associated with reflection, cycles, purity, the feminine principle. Known for its antibacterial properties for millennia, the book notes its use since 4000 BCE. Colloidal silver's historical effectiveness against numerous pathogens without causing resistance is mentioned. However, there's a very clear tread carefully note about the danger of argyria from excessive long-term internal use. This is a condition where silver particles deposit in the skin, turning it permanently blue-gray. So potent, but requires caution.
Argyria, right. Good
Yeah.
warning. And finally, gold, the sun.
Gold, sun. The ultimate goal for many alchemists, seen as the most perfect, incorruptible metal. It's stable, doesn't tarnish, and importantly, it's considered non-toxic. The book mentions its atom spin right-handed, making it uniquely harmonious with biological systems. Gold has a long history in healing chrysotherapy, used historically for conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, as a general tonic for vitality and heart health. The book mentions historical practices like implanting gold threads, or even cooking rice with a gold coin. Alchemists sought purified oils of gold or potable gold for their profound healing and perfecting properties.
So gold is seen as inherently beneficial. The book also briefly touches on tin Jupiter, alloys, structure, and copper Venus, generation, beauty, affinity for sulfur and water, healing properties too.
Yes, and the core alchemical idea when working with any of these metals is that each one contains the inherent potential, the energy signature, required for its own transformation into a higher state, if worked with properly, both externally and internally.
That brings us back beautifully to the most profound level, alchemy in you. The book powerfully states that true, lasting transformation requires change on all levels, physical, mental, and spiritual. Spiritual alchemy is presented as the perfection of the soul itself, tracing right back to ancient Egypt, where the ultimate goal was seen as awakening the soul and body to their inherent divine nature.
Exactly. Spiritual alchemy in this context isn't separate from the physical work. It's the ultimate aim, the refinement and perfection of the human soul. The lab work was often seen as a means to understand and achieve this inner transformation.
And the book draws these incredibly direct parallels between the alchemical operations we discussed, nigredo, albedo, rubedo, and psychological processes. Let's revisit that. The black phase, nigredo, is that necessary confrontation with chaos, suffering, and darkness within oneself. The quote, "To face the dragon is to seize life," really captures this. It's about facing the psychological shadow, right?
Precisely. The shadow, in Jungian terms, holds all the inferior, rejected, or undeveloped parts of ourselves. Nigredo is the process of bringing this difficult, often unconscious material into conscious awareness so it can be dealt with, rather than letting it run our lives from the dark.
Okay, then the white phase, albedo.
Albedo is about integrating that chaos and suffering after confronting it. It's learning to see the value in the darkness, finding the pearl in the mud. It's about using the dragon's powerful energy constructively, rather than being consumed by it or projecting it outwards. It's achieving a state of clarity and inner peace after the storm.
Integrating the shadow. And the red phase, rubedo.
Rubedo is the culmination, unleashing that fully integrated energy, merging with primal forces, but now from a place of purity and wholeness achieved in the earlier stages. It requires a lack of ego, a kind of surrender. The book suggests a quiet, receptive state. Be still. Rest in the arms of the dragon, implying the dragon's immense power will align with the pure light of your conscious mind if you can merge with those energies calmly, without fear or selfish desire. It's becoming one with the life force.
Wow, that's a profound journey. And you mentioned Carl Jung earlier. His connection to alchemy is significant, isn't it?
Hugely significant for 20th century psychology. The book recounts Jung's key experiences. A profound dream about discovering a hidden ancient wing added to his house, which he later understood represented his own subconscious. Another dream placed him specifically in the 17th century, pointing him directly towards studying alchemy. He devoured alchemical texts and came to see alchemy not as primitive chemistry, but as a sophisticated symbolic system, mapping the deep processes of the unconscious mind, the journey towards wholeness, or what he called individuation. He saw the four elements, for example, not just as substances, but as representing fundamental psychological functions: thinking, air; feeling, water; sensation, earth; and intuition, fire.
That psychological connection is fascinating. And the book provides that really cool modern example, suggesting J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series unconsciously mirrors the three alchemical phases. It points out the black phase culminating with the death of Sirius Black, the white phase centered around the wisdom and guidance of Albus Dumbledore, Albus meaning white, and the final red phase involving the earthy, fiery Rubeus Hagrid, Rubeus meaning red, playing a key role in the process leading to Voldemort's defeat and Harry's self-realization.
It's a very compelling, relatable parallel, isn't it? It shows how these archetypal stages of transformation can appear in storytelling, even unconsciously.
Definitely makes it click.
Huh.
Now, meditation is also mentioned as a key alchemical practice, tied back to ora et labora, pray and work.
Yes, meditation or contemplation was central. The book notes this was historically quite dangerous. Why? Because private meditation, seeking direct experience of the divine outside the structure and control of the established church, could easily lead to accusations of heresy.
Ah, bypassing the middleman.
Exactly. And alchemical meditation wasn't necessarily about passive relaxation. It was often seen as an active harnessing of spiritual forces, inner energies for transformation, and even manifesting changes in the outer world. Focused intention.
The book describes different types: lunar, solar, stellar.
Right. It outlines three main types. Lunar meditation, focused inward, plumbing the depths of the soul, exploring dreams, emotions, the subconscious powers connecting with the receptive, watery, reflective aspects. Solar meditation, more extroverted, focused on consciousness, light, clarity, aiming to break down the limitations of the ego, purify awareness, connect with active, fiery, rational principles. And stellar meditation, seen as a synthesis or integration of lunar and solar, seeking to retrieve the light sparks hidden in matter or the subconscious, unifying inner and outer realities, and creating a focused internal beacon or connection to the higher self.
And even specific alchemical symbols were used for meditation, like the Azoth drawing, which is also potentially dangerous.
Yes, the Azoth drawing is a very complex mandala containing many layers of alchemical symbolism, the elements, planets, essentials, operations. Meditating on it was a way to internalize the entire great work. The specific historical danger the book points out relates to how the downward-pointing triangle, symbolizing spirit descending into matter, was often shown over the alchemist's face in the center of the drawing. This implied a direct, personal connection to the divine, almost suggesting the alchemist's illuminated face was God's face, a potentially heretical idea challenging the church's authority.
Wow, that puts a different spin on it. All this leads towards the sacred marriage, doesn't it? The union of soul and spirit. The book calls this the most important event in alchemy.
It really does. Whether it happens symbolically in the flask during conjunction or internally through spiritual practice, this union is seen as the crucial turning point. It's what produces the philosopher's stone, the philosophical child, the state of perfected wholeness. Personally, the book frames it as the union of your own spirit, conscious mind, will, and soul, emotions, subconscious inner depths within you. An act of deep inner love, acceptance, and reconciliation between seemingly opposing parts of yourself. It's symbolized by the profound feeling of connection when falling in love or experiencing deep communion with nature.
That makes it very personal. Now, remarkably, the book argues that alchemy isn't just confined to history or personal mysticism. It has surprising relevance in the modern world, too.
Absolutely. It explores the idea of social alchemy, applying these principles to our relationships. Your shared heart or commitment becomes the athanor, the furnace. Love and conscious effort are the transformative agents, keeping the fires burning through challenges. The Sufi poet Rumi's idea, quoted in the source about love being a fire that burns away everything but the beloved, perfectly captures this alchemical process of purification and transformation within human connection.
That's beautiful, and it even maps the alchemical phases onto organizational transformation in the workplace. That's quite a leap.
It is, but the parallels are interesting. Calcination, dissolution, and separation in a company context relate to freeing up the essential energies the company spirit, management, vision, structure, and its soul, the workforce, loyalty, creativity, morale. The book stresses the importance of the golden rule of management here, treating employees well to balance these soul and spirit levels, especially during difficult processes like restructuring or right-sizing.
Okay, so balancing spirit and soul in the company, then conjunction.
Conjunction is about achieving that balance, creating a unified vision where the spirit, strategy, goals, descends, and the soul, employee engagement, creativity, ascends to meet it, a shared purpose.
Makes sense. Fermentation.
Fermentation involves actively combining these, often opposing, energies. This requires skilled management, good communication, feedback loops, dialogue, fostering flexible awareness. It's about generating group synergy, what the book calls the magic of group synergy, where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts.
And distillation and coagulation.
Distillation is about purifying the life force of the organization, overcoming barriers, untying emotional knots or conflicts, freeing creativity from rigid structures or emotional baggage. It's refining the process. And coagulation is the final result, the stable, effective corporate identity, the crystallization of the transformed, successful organization.
It's a fascinating framework. The book also links freedom itself to alchemy.
Yes. Freedom is presented as a fundamental hermetic and alchemical concept. It's linked to the founding principles of America, influenced by figures like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, who were associated with Freemasonry, which itself incorporated alchemical ideas. The freedom for individuals to pursue their potential and the freedom of markets with their fluctuating prices, competition, innovation are seen as creating an extremely alchemical environment, constantly breaking down old forms and creating new ones.
And money, how does that fit in?
Money itself is discussed as a potent agent of transformation. Its first matter isn't just currency, but the vital principle of exchange and potential it represents. The idea isn't necessarily just hoarding wealth, but accumulating and using it alchemically, consciously, ethically, without doing harm.
Okay, conscious wealth.
Right. And the book suggests you don't need to be conventionally wealthy to have wealth in an alchemical sense, finding richness and satisfaction, experiences, and conscious non-spending, rather than endless acquisition. More profoundly, having sufficient resources or money grants the freedom necessary to pursue deeper alchemy, the great work, personal transformation. The book quotes George Bernard Shaw making the point that poverty often denies people the resources and leisure needed for self-development and freedom.
That's a sobering point. The book even ventures into quantum alchemy, seeing overlaps with modern physics.
It does. It finds fascinating resonances. For instance, the wave-particle duality of light and electrons in quantum physics behaving like a wave one moment. A particle the next is likened to the mercurial Retus, embodying opposite natures simultaneously.
Wave-particle duality. Interesting comparison.
And modern quantum mechanics acknowledges the role of the observer, of consciousness, as a factor in determining outcomes at the quantum level. This resonates deeply with the alchemists' belief in the power of their focused mind, their consciousness, to influence the material work. The book mentions concepts like chemicalization, using focused consciousness or intention to manifest desires or changes, which aligns with alchemical goals of transformation directed by will. The entire evolution of life itself can be viewed through an alchemical lens as nature's slow process of perfecting matter.
And specific physicists are mentioned.
Yes, figures like David Bohm, who developed interpretations of quantum mechanics where mind and matter are seen as interconnected polarities, and electrons might possess a kind of proto-mind. Even recent high-energy physics experiments creating quark-gluon plasma are likened by some commentators, mentioned in the source, to momentarily achieving the state of the first matter. Like the ancient alchemist, the modern quantum physicist is searching for the subtle, underlying patterns and unity of reality.
Mind-blowing connections. Okay, to bring this all right down to earth, the book introduces a lovely idea. The kitchen alchemist.
Yes, making it accessible. There's that wonderful Sufi saying quoted. All the qualities of a good alchemist, patience, attention to detail, reverence, the pursuit of perfection, knowledge of fire can be found in someone who knows how to cook an egg perfectly. It's not about needing a fancy lab.
I love that. It's about the approach.
Exactly. And a good cook, like a good alchemist, adds something of themselves, that fifth element, the quintessence, their intention, their care to the work, imbuing the food with positive energy.
And the book actually gives you ways you can try your hand at creating some simple alchemical compounds at home, safely. Things like making herbal infusions like tea, decoctions, simmering tougher plant parts like roots, ointments, creams, lotions, even extracting essential oils using methods like steam distillation if you have the equipment.
Right, and it provides a clear, step-by-step process for making a basic herbal tincture using the spagyric principles of separation. This involves maceration, crushing, or grinding the chosen dried herb, which is seen as releasing its spirit or divine essence. Then you extract this essence using high-proof grain alcohol. The book is extremely clear here, stressing you must use food-grade grain alcohol like Everclear and absolutely avoid denatured alcohol as it contains poisonous additives.
Okay, macerate the herb, add food-grade alcohol.
Seal it in a jar, let it steep for several weeks, shaking it daily, often timing it with moon cycles. Then strain out the liquid tincture that's your purified mercury and sulfur combined.
Got it. And to make that tincture into a proper elixir.
To elevate it to an elixir, which reunites all three essentials, you take the solid herb residue left after straining the tincture, the bark. You carefully burn this residue down to a fine white or gray ash through calcination. This ash represents the purified salt principle of the plant, its mineral body. Then you add the liquid tincture back to this purified mineral ash in a clean jar. You shake it well and allow it to digest, sit in a slightly warm place, like near a pilot light, or in gentle sunlight for several more weeks, shaking periodically. This allows the salt to dissolve what it can from the tincture.
So combining the liquid and the ash.
Right. Finally, you carefully filter the liquid elixir off the remaining ash. This final liquid now theoretically contains the reunited and purified sulfur, oil essence, mercury, spiritual alcohol, and salt minerals of the plant in a more potent, balanced, and refined form than the simple tincture. Again, the book repeats that crucial safety note. Never use denatured alcohol for any preparation intended for internal or even skin use.
Okay, that's a clear process with important safety notes. We've truly taken a deep dive today, haven't we? We've traveled through the vast and fascinating world of alchemy. From its ancient origins in Egypt and its core principles like the first matter, the four elements, and the three essentials, we explored the legendary quest for the Philosopher's Stone. We've looked inside the practical lab, understood the profound spiritual and psychological journey mirrored in its operations like nigredo, albedo, and rubedo. We've seen its presence in nature through spagyrics and the planetary metals, and discovered its surprising connections to the modern world in our relationships, our work, concepts of freedom and money, even at the cutting edge of quantum physics, right down to making simple alchemical compounds safely in your own kitchen.
It's clear from the source, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Alchemy, that alchemy is something far richer and more profound than just that old stereotype of chasing physical gold. It emerges as a sophisticated, holistic system for understanding and, importantly, actively participating in the processes of transformation across physical, mental, and spiritual dimensions. It's about evolution and perfection.
So, as you go about your week, perhaps take a moment to reflect on some of these ideas. You might start noticing echoes of alchemical principles in unexpected places in your own life. Maybe in the cycles of challenge and transformation you face, the dynamics in your relationships or workplace. Hopefully, this deep dive leaves you seeing the world, and maybe even yourself, through a slightly different, perhaps more alchemical lens.
And maybe we can leave you with a final thought, something echoed strongly in the book. The ancient alchemists profoundly believed their consciousness, their inner state, was integral to the success of their transformative work. Could it be that our own consciousness, our focused intention and awareness, plays a more significant role in shaping our reality than we usually assume? Or perhaps consider that beautiful idea that there truly is a hidden star, a perfect, incorruptible essence, waiting patiently to be revealed and perfected within all things, including, most importantly, within you.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.